After England defeated the French at the Battle of Bremule, Normandy was back in King Henry's hands. But 1 year later, his good fortune turned to tragedy. In 1120, his son and heir William Adelin died in a shipwreck. The future of Henry I's kingdom was in jeopardy. Henry desperately needed a new heir. With no legitimate sons left alive, he broke with tradition and chose his daughter, Matilda. Henry forced his barons to swear an oath to accept Matilda as queen. But when the king died, they broke their promise. England would not be ruled by a woman. Matilda's cousin Stephen saw his chance and claimed the throne. The crisis moved to the capital. At Westminster Abbey, Stephen was crowned king, but Matilda wanted what was hers. She was also lining up powerful supporters who would fight Stephen for her right to rule. Their conflict engulfed England in civil war. Fighting raged throughout the land. In 1141, everything focused on one of the kingdom's most strategic cities, Lincoln. Matilda's allies had commandeered the castle. But King Stephen was determined to take it back. He besieged the castle. Stalemate. As dawn broke on February the 2nd, everything was about to change. Matilda's half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, raced to break the siege. As Robert's forces approached Lincoln, Stephen's army turned away from the castle to face them. Robert could win Matilda the crown, but only if his army could win the day.
Útěk císařovny. V roce 1142 panovaly třeskuté mrazy. Císařovna Matilda musela v zajetí rivala krále Štěpána uskutečnit odvážný útěk z věže Oxfordského hradu. Za pomoci několika věrných vojáků se pod rouškou noci slanila z hrade. Božina našla skulinku mezi Štěpánovými obléhajícími vojsky, spolu s Matildou se jí podařilo nepozorovaně uprchnout. Matilda byla oděna do bílé, aby splynula se zasněženým okolím. Matilda překonala zamrzlou řeku Temži a poté se několik mil brodila hlubokým sněhem, než našla útočiště ve své pevnosti Wallingford. Krátce po útěku se vytratila ke svému dvoru v Renew, kde začala osnovat další fázi boje o anglický trůn.
A counterweight trebuchet was the king of all siege engines. A catapult capable of smashing down castle walls from great distances. At Warwick Castle in England, they've built a replica, one of the largest in the world. Originating in 7th century China, by the 13th century, trebuchets had evolved into devastatingly powerful weapons.
Such a simple design, but so effective.
It has several key features. A pivoted arm with a weight at one end, and a sling to hold the projectile at the other. To prime, the 6-ton weight is raised using tread wheels.
So this is one of the wheels, one of two that's attached to an axle, which would lift the counterweight, weighing 6 tons. It's based on muscle power alone. What's essential about launching a projectile as far as possible is making sure that this end of the arm is moving as fast as possible. So once that weight drops, it really sends this point of the arm moving at its highest velocity.
This was done by positioning the pivot close to the counterweight and by launching the projectile from a sling. When released, the sling whips round, vastly increasing the launch speed. Trebuchets were carefully aimed, like modern guns.
In order to weaken the castle walls or even breach them, you had to make sure that the projectiles hit the same spot every single time.
For each projectile to follow the same trajectory, they all had to be the same weight and shape. To achieve this, masons used a gauge.
Now I'm going to load this projectile into the sling. Oh, this one must weigh about 25 kilograms, but some projectiles can get up to 150 kilograms. That's the weight of 2 men.
Trebuchets were also used to throw burning tar, beehives, even dead bodies. Anything to cause maximum distress to the enemy.
Did you hear that whoosh?
It was the counterweight trebuchet's lethal combination of power and accuracy that made it the ultimate medieval siege weapon. Victory over King Stephen at Lincoln gave Matilda the upper hand in her fight for the English crown. But in the years that followed, fragile loyalties shifted, and under threat of capture, Matilda was forced to retreat. As her holdings in England came under attack from the king's army, it fell to her son Henry to keep Matilda's claim to the throne alive.
Anžouská říše. Když král Štěpán zemřel, nastoupil na anglický trůn Matildin syn Jindřich. Stal se prvním králem, který vládl nad říší, kterou dnes známe pod názvem Anžouská říše. Jindřich byl aktivním a ambiciozním vladařem, odhodlaný rozšiřovat a chránit srdce své říše. Osobně putoval po odlehlých územích, uzavíral dohody, potlačoval povstání a anektoval nová území. Jindřich jednal tak rychle a s takovou zoufalostí, že francouzský král ho popsal jako že spíše létá, než se plaví nebo jezdí na koni. Ale stejně jako Jindřichovi předkové se snažili udržet svou moc, tak u anžovských králů trvalo pouhé 2 generace, než se impérium opět rozpadlo a Anglie se začala zmítat válkou.
At Wallingford, in the shadow of the castle, Matilda's faction, commanded by her son Henry, proved it was still willing to fight King Stephen for the crown. But after 15 years of conflict, both sides had had enough. So, they made a deal. Matilda would surrender her claim to the throne on condition that when Stephen died, her eldest living son Henry would succeed him. A year later, he was crowned King Henry II and proceeded to grow the kingdom into the mighty Angevin Empire. But, once again, what the king had spent his life building, his own children were destined to destroy. King Henry II had 4 surviving legitimate sons, and he planned to divide up his kingdom between them. But they fought bitterly for dominance. Against the odds, Henry's youngest son John became king. But King John was deeply unpopular. He lost huge swathes of the Angevin Empire gained by his father, then failed to reclaim them in expensive battles. Paid for by taxing his subjects. Eventually, England's barons could take it no more. They forced John to agree to a charter that restricted his power, the Magna Carta. But he went against his word. Furious, they rebelled, inviting Prince Louis of France to invade England. In 1216, Louis sailed to Dover and set his sights on taking this, Dover Castle. Held by forces loyal to King John, it was commanded by Hubert de Burgh. He described the castle as the key to England. He was right. If it fell to the French, so would the kingdom.
Brána do Anglie. Vysoko nad bílými útesy Douvru se tyčí jeden z největších anglických hradů. Nechal ho vystavět Vilém Dobyvatel, aby zabránil další invazi a hrad strážil Anglii po staletí. Každá část jeho konstrukce, od strmých strážních věží, trčících palebných ochozů, obehnané pevnosti, hlubokých příkopů a prstencových hradeb, byla navržena tak, aby hrad zapůsobil, imponoval a odolával. V roce 1216 hrad Douvr však přestál francouzské obléhání nejen díky své konstrukci. Velitel hradu Hubert de Burgh se tváří v tvář intenzivní francouzské invazi nechal inspirovat vytrvalým anglickým odporem. Jeho muži ubránili pevnost a svého krále s neochvějným odhodláním. De Burgh označoval hrad jako bránu do Anglie, která díky své architektuře a houževnatosti posádky zůstala nekompromisně uzavřená.
In the year prior to the defense of Dover, King John's defiance of the Magna Carta had mired England in a rebellion known as the First Barons' War. Across England, barons broke ties with the crown and seized important cities, including Rochester. With his reign under threat, John deployed his forces to retake Rochester and capture the traitors.
People often imagine that castle walls were just left as bare stone, but in fact they weren't. They were plastered, painted, and decorated.
The process of making medieval paint begins in a quarry.
This is a sandstone with a really high iron content. In it, we find pockets of ochre. This is iron oxide, like rust, and the ochre is one of the main ingredients in pigment making.
First, the ochre is crushed into a fine powder.
The finer the particles in paint, the better the paint will be.
Once ground up, water is added. Then the mixture is sieved.
This is the exact opposite of making pasta at home. At home, when you sieve your pasta, you then keep it for your meal. Here, what's going to end up in the sieve will be discarding.
What's needed are the tiny particles suspended in the water.
Once it's dry, it's going to look something like this. You can see that all the water has evaporated, leaving just this very fine crust, which will then be ground into the fine pigment which is used to make paint.
But ochre's colour palette doesn't end there. If it's heated, something magical happens. Yellow ochre turns red. And heating it for even longer creates a whole spectrum of colours.
It's been burnt for over 72 hours at 1,000 degrees Celsius, and that gives us this incredible purple colour.
To turn the pigment into paint, it's bound together with egg and tree sap.
A popular motif in the Middle Ages was the use of stones and roses. That's where you paint on blocks of stone to make it look like you could afford to pay stonemasons to produce dress blocks of stone and then decorate them with 5-petaled flowers.
So, medieval castles were far from the gloomy places we imagine today. They were full of colour and light.
Nikola de la Haye. Lincolnský hrad byl za nepokojů občanské války strategickou pevností v boji o anglický trůn. V čele obrany stála osoba, kterou byste čekali nejméně, stárnoucí žena. Lady Nikola de la Haye žila v časech, kdy o osudu žen rozhodovali manželé. Přesto se Nikola díky své štědrosti a lojalitě stala obdivovanou, dokonce obávanou správkyní Lincolnského hradu. Sama plánovala a řídila obranu hradu během 2 obléhání a při pravidelných nájezdech, přičemž dokázala uhájit svou pozici proti přesile. Král Jan a jeho dědic Jindřich III. Vděčí za své místo na trůnu právě Lady Nikole. Vyjadřovali se o ní s úctou jako o naší milované a věrné Nikole de la Haye.
When forces loyal to King John undermined Rochester Castle, it spelled doom for the rebels inside. Within days they had surrendered. But the rebel barons weren't done yet. Their ally, Prince Louis of France, had sent an invasion force to help the barons overthrow King John. Then, in late 1216, the king fell ill with dysentery and died. His son, just 9 years old, was crowned King Henry III. It was now up to the young king's regent, the 70-year-old legendary knight William Marshal, to protect the crown. He faced a near impossible challenge. England was crumbling. Rebels were taking town after town. But William Marshal bided his time and prepared to defeat the rebels. Then in May 1217, he got the chance that he'd been waiting for. William discovered that the rebels planned to simultaneously besiege both Dover Castle and Lincoln Castle. With rebel forces split and weakened, William Marshal led his royalist army to Lincoln. The castle on one side of the city was still controlled by royalists, under its formidable constable, Lady Nicola de la Haye. But the streets of the city were under rebel control. On May 20th, 1217, the Royalist Relief Force, led by William Marshal, arrived to retake the rebel-controlled city. The future of England rode on the success of this mission. William Marshal's success in retaking Lincoln was an overwhelming victory for the Royalists. The rebel barons had been defeated, and their French allies driven out of England altogether. William Marshal now focused on creating a stable kingdom for the young King Henry III. To maintain the backing of the rebels, in 1217, a royal seal of approval was given to a reissued Magna Carta, limiting the power of the monarchy. Many barons held lands in both England and Normandy. But now they faced a choice. On which side of the Channel would they make their home? Many chose England. The cross-Channel kingdom was over, establishing a clear English identity. But the impact of the Normans on England's evolution is still felt today. Almost 1,000 years later, the surviving Norman castles and cathedrals still dominate the landscape. In the midst of the modern city, William the Conqueror's fortress, the Tower of London, remains a powerful reminder of their legacy. But it's the unseen influence of the Normans that endures. The Norman invasion changed the English language and established the foundations of modern parliament and governance. And it's all because one man, William the Conqueror, claimed the English crown that he believed by rights was his. The Normans conquered a country and changed the course of England forever.
Děkuji všem za zhlédnutí videa. Pokud chceš, podpoř mě lajkem, odběrem a dej si zvoneček, ať ti neuteče další video. A co nás čeká příště? Příště nás čeká mongolská říše. Tak zatím ahoj.